Hey everybody, it's Captain John O'Meara. I'm here with Chief John Rogers of the Somerville Police Department. Chief, how are you, sir?
Doing great, thanks. How's everybody?
Doing well. This, of course, is our first podcast, and I know that you're a popular guy on social media. We love to reach out to the community. Of course, going back years since we've had social media, I think you've done a good job of putting information out to the citizens. Tell us about you personally for those who may not know about you.
Well, I'm here at Somerville PD, been here for decades and really love the community, love the organization, love the town. So when we were able to, switch things around with our social media presence, and I am a electronics moron, but other people are running it, it's really tapped into getting our community to know our folks. We keep it very positive and want to keep it that way, so folks see us as human beings and understand that not only do we love being police officers and dispatchers and all that take care of our community, but we're human beings and we love them and want to make sure they're taken care of.
I know there's some other effects of our social media footprint, and I personally know a lot of it has even helped us with recruitment. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
It certainly has. The fact that people are, even back checking us before they come in for an interview is really good. And I really appreciate folks that work here that are reaching out to other folks in the law enforcement community and say, hey, listen, this is a place you need to be or want to be. It's a different, we're selling a culture up here, and a lot of it has to do with that social media and understanding that, keeping a positive outlook, especially on our social media presence across all of it. Our detectives generally aren't too happy with me because they want to do wanted subjects and stuff like that, and I like to keep it off of that. So, our folks that are coming in for jobs, it's really helped out quite a bit.
Yeah, it's definitely a window into the organization. We put out so much info, mainly positive. I know we like to keep it positive. I want to talk about 2020. Very bizarre year for law enforcement, for the country, etc. COVID, protests. Let's go back to the start of 2020 and how is the agency affected on a day-to-day and even long-term with COVID-19?
I think COVID-19 obviously is impacting every organization, but I think we're going to have long-lasting impacts because of it. 2020 started out just as a normal year. We were starting to get together all of our departmental meetings. What do we want to do, working as a team, focusing on our community outreach and focusing on being better. And as soon as we started getting going, the door was slammed on us. And not a lot of information out there other than what was coming out of China at the time. So, we kind of hit the brakes and did a hard, fast hit the brakes to make sure that our folks were going to be able to remain safe and not get this plague that has affected us so much. So, it's kind of a weird situation where we stopped all proactive police work for months in order to try to keep our folks as safe as possible, but yet we had an increased call volume over the year. And it's different calls. The fact that our community was in mental crisis, there's no getting around it. We were dealing, at one point we had a 186% increase in mental crisis calls. And a lot of it is the fact that, we're dealing with a global pandemic and folks hadn't dealt with anything like that. And it really has impacted our organization. It's tragic the amount of loss and pain that is out there because of COVID. And it really did change us. However, we were still able to have a good productive year as far as trying to do as much as we could to help our community. So although it did impact and continues to impact our organization, there's always some good that comes out of bad, and that's what we need to focus on.
Right, we're wearing our masks, we're getting our vaccinations. I know the department is almost complete with being vaccinated. Our first round and second round, I think in the next week, will be pretty much, You're 100%.
Yeah, and that's exciting because, what we're trying to get across to all of our employees and even the town is, if we don't come to work, then who does? So making sure that we get vaccinated. We have spent an inordinate amount of money and energy into things that are PPE and the cleaning and all that kind of stuff to make sure that we have a safe environment here. However, it does terrify me that we answer 100, 115,000 calls for service here. Every one of those calls for service usually involves multiple police officers in an unknown. So it throws another level of consternation onto making sure these folks go home safe every night.
And I know you don't have the numbers in front of you, Chief, but I know there is a number how many man hours were lost by having to quarantine officers who actually infected with COVID-19. You want to speak?
Yeah, I mean, it's staggering numbers, simply because they were really good towards, at the onset of it, and then it got kind of crazy in the last 6 months. But we've had a lot of people out because of exposures, because of being sick. Unfortunately, we've had a couple officers hospitalized, but thankfully they came out of that on the right side. A lot of people aren't coming out of it on the right side, going into hospitals and not coming out. So, it's staggering to look at an organization our size and see how many people are just exposed on a daily basis. And that's why we really push the vaccination, getting all of our people vaccinated to make sure that they're safe. I mean, the vaccination is a good start. We still need to wear a mask. We still need to sanitize as much as possible. We still need to socially distance. All these things to keep us safe. And again, hopefully, as I've told everybody, hopefully this is just obviously a bump in the road. We're going to get through it. We're going to be better because of it. But we have to get through it now. We got to be safe.
Yeah, we're going to keep on doing what we need to do to keep each other safe here in the building, socially distance, wear our masks. I know we got a lot of cleaning supplies in, make sure we sanitize our buildings, our cars, etc. Because these officers have to do their jobs. If they have to make an arrest, they don't know if the person that's in their car has COVID-19. We're providing masks to people that we're arresting because we have to transport them.
Yeah, we have to. And unfortunately, a lot of these folks find out after the fact when they get to the jail and get tested that they've been tested positive, and it obviously causes pause to what we're doing. I mean, we stopped fingerprinting people for the longest time up in the lobby for various reasons. People need to get fingerprinted, and even just the other day we fingerprinted an individual that called and said, "Oops, I've got COVID." So of course we had to shut down that room and sanitize it. And a person didn't do it on purpose, but it's just one more layer that we need to be cognizant of when we're dealing with the public. But from our records clerks to our dispatchers to our officers to everybody that works here, so it's something that we need to keep in the front of our mind.
Well, with 2020, we had some other issues going on in our world, in the law enforcement world. There were some incidents that really sparked a lot of outrage from the public, rightfully so, with some of the things that we're seeing. Of course, I'm talking about the George Floyd incident that sparked a lot of protests, and I think we saw our share of protests. But from your perspective as the chief of police for the town of Somerville, let's get your take on.
We were very fortunate. To have received an all-call when CPD was having some really bad civil unrest downtown. Because, you led the team that went down there, Johnny, and we learned a lot of lessons. And it's one thing in law enforcement is there's no sense in recreating the wheel. Let's learn lessons. I'm not saying they did anything bad. I'm not saying they did anything good. But what I'm saying is we learned. So our protests that came to town for a couple of days, they were complete unknowns. So we were ready when they came to town. A lot of people might have said, "Wow, that's a lot of cops in town," and you're right, there was a lot of cops in town, because we were going to do everything we could do to make sure that we didn't have the mass destruction and chaos. And we were blessed. We had a wonderful group of individuals, on all days that came up and did protests. They did them peacefully, they did them respectfully. They asked me to go into the crowd and speak to them. I did, which, brought some anxiety to some of our folks that were out there because I didn't tell them I was going in the crowd. But I learned from that one. I got yelled at by a couple officers, but that's okay. That's what I want. I want people to tell me when I'm doing something silly. But we were very lucky, and we were ready. We had a lot of boots on the ground. Thank goodness from our federal partners to our state partners. I put out the call for help, and people showed. And we were ready for it. We were able to allow Americans to do exactly what Americans should do, and that's their First Amendment. And I think the events went off well. We learned from them too. Can we do it better? Sure. Of course, we can always do it better. But it spawned a lot of things that we even started last year in the middle of a pandemic on, going back to the Charleston shooting with Dylan Roof. I remember the next morning, or that morning, I saw Greg Mullen standing up doing a press conference with all these different religious leaders standing behind him. And I wasn't really listening to what he was saying, but I was thinking to myself, how do you do that? And how do we get our community together to understand what we are, who we are, and why we do what we do, and have these folks be our champions out there, for lack of better words. So out of that spawned our Dignity Project with Coastal Crisis Chaplaincy. Had a couple of meetings with Rich Robinson down there, and we were able to give birth to this Dignity Project, which is a year-long project and involves people in the public. But it's interesting because I was asked not too long ago, I spoke at a conference, and they asked me, well, what did you see as the problem and how did you address it with your community relations? And what I told them is, I didn't know if we had a problem, but why not explore it? And if we do have a problem, let's fix it and get with our community. And in this project, it really is some hard questions being asked for both by the community to us and vice versa. And it's just so we can learn each other and grow. And it's, again, it's a year-long project, and we kicked it off in 2020 in the middle of a global pandemic. We obviously aren't doing face-to-face meetings, but we're using, the Zoom conferences and stuff like that. And I think history will dictate whether I was right or wrong, but I'm also confident that our organization is going to be better and stronger because of it. And it's things that you just have to recreate what you do and how you do it. And thankfully, I'm surrounded by a command staff that forces me to do that and forces me to think outside of my lenses. And that's the point of command staff. I don't want a bunch of yes men. So, stuff like that has really made what could be considered a dumpster fire of 2021 into a productive year of what we want to do in the community.
Yeah, we've definitely had the community support. I'm surprised we all haven't gained 20 to 30 pounds. It's like every day somebody's coming to the station, dropping off cookies, candies, whatever. It seems like it's a daily thing.
It is. The pandemic pounds are real. I've avoided my doctor for a physical for a year now because of it. And jokes aside, we are so lucky, fortunate, and blessed to live, work, and play in this community. And it truly has been almost every day since this thing started, people coming up. There was one day I lost count, but I think it was up to 8 different people or organizations came in just to show their support to our officers. And it's huge with everything that was going on around the United States. If we go back even to the West Coast, they had months of daily and nightly civil unrest. And we had months of our citizens coming up to our organization and thanking us. And it really means a lot to our officers and our dispatchers and our records clerks and our IT personnel that, our community gets it. They support us. We are not perfect. I don't claim to be perfect myself, but we're trying really hard for our folks to understand that we need our community and our community needs us, and it has paid dividends for us.
So looking forward, Chief, we're here February 2020. What's the outlook for 2021? I mean, what's the outlook? What's to come? Where are we going?
Well, we can only go up. So that's the best part. Yeah, we're still in this global pandemic. I get it. We still got a job to do, but we still got a lot of good things happening. Again, getting in the community. Our Part of Puff teams are kicking up. Just saw the schedule coming for that. So we're not going to stop doing what we do, but we're going to continue to look at ways to do things better, more efficient, spending less taxpayers' money, and getting the equipment we need. But how are we going to do it and continue to do it better? And 2021 is going to be a great year, any way you slice it. In all honesty, 2020 was actually not a bad year. Lot of road bumps and trying to figure out ways to do things safe. But on the flip side of that is we managed to get through 2020 and into 2021 with no officers seriously injured and or died. So, you got to look at the positive side of it. So I think 2021 is going to be a great year. Here we are, we're kicking it off with something totally new, podcast. I had to listen to one to see what it was about. I don't watch TV, all that kind of stuff. So, until you guys throw it at me, I don't get into it. But I'm excited because it's another way to reach forward into our community and let them look at a little piece of our world and understand that the men and women of the Somerville Police Department are human beings, and they really care for their community.
Absolutely. Beyond 2021, the growth of Somerville just looks like it's
exciting.
Yeah.
It really is. If you look at, we've been here a long time, but, I tell people all the time, what has changed at my first house in 1995 in Somerville was $60,000 that just recently sold for $200,000. I moved it a long time ago, but I just keep looking at it. But, the big girls, for lack of better words, the Boeings, the Mercedes, the Volvos, they've changed our entire community, I think, for the better. And that's one thing that we need to keep looking forward to. If we look at those three businesses, we're not talking about just 34 people moving to the area from the upstate. These are 34 to 38 people moving to the area a day that are global. So it's changing how we respond to people and understand different cultures. And it's really made our community explode. Look at that whole Nexton area and the 973 acres of the town just annexed not too long ago. Our footprint is changing. Our organization is growing, and it's going to continue to grow. We have to. But there's a lot of neat things going on in the annexation world, and the growth of the community is changing our community. I was just looking at some numbers about response times and how much time we spend on calls, and you got to put that all into the matrix. It's just not answering calls. It's what kind of calls are we answering? They're more involved. They take more time. They take more officers. So there's a lot of things that are changing our organization as we look at it from a staffing level. And as the town grows, and it's going to continue to grow, we need to keep looking at it. So it's crazy what is coming beyond 2021 in the next couple of years. I think if anybody was dropped into Somerville that was here when I moved in February of '95, when we moved up from Charleston, and then they went away, and then they dropped today, they wouldn't even understand it. They wouldn't recognize it. Yeah, it's crazy.
I think when I came to Somerville PD from another agency, I think we had 55 officers, maybe.
Tops.
Yeah, and you came a couple of years previous to that, and now we're at 120.
121.
121. Even I didn't know the number. That's how fast we're growing. But we're at 121, 20 reserves.
Yeah.
And, obviously our civilian employee numbers are continuing to grow as well. So it's amazing to walk down the hall with all the portraits of the department over the years. We do that every 5 years and just look at, wow, it's grown so much. And it seems like a short time to me, but
no, it's growing crazy, and I'm a first name guy. I could care less about rank and or last names, and sometimes it's a struggle to remember everybody's first name. I used to be really good about remembering their wife's names and their kids' names, but unfortunately that's making a little bit more of a challenge with all these folks. But I'm trying. I'm trying to get there. And of course, these guys and gals, they don't go by their government names, which makes it even more confusing. So it's crazy.
Any parting words, Chief?
Hey, I appreciate the opportunity and welcome everybody to our first podcast that's listening. again, this is just like our organization. It's only going to get bigger and better. And it's another tool that we can bring to our community for our community to understand us and for us to understand our community.
Right. And in this podcast, of course, after this, there's going to be some other segments, Chief. Some from a couple of our detectives talking about some open homicide cases and things. And I'm hoping that in the future we're gonna have more interaction with the community on the podcast and actually have citizen involvement with the podcast.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Whether they call in or whether they come here into our makeshift studio.
I like it.
I think moving forward, it's only going to get better, and we're going to learn from our do's and don'ts, and hopefully it'll be successful. And just like you said, another way to just reach out into the community and let the community be involved with what's going on here at Somerville PD.
It's good stuff.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, so in this segment, I'm here with Lieutenant Chris Hirsch, Detective Dorothy Buchanan, here to talk about a case that they've been working on. Lieutenant Hirsch?
Hey, I'm Lieutenant Chris Hirsch. I work with the Somerville Police Department. I'm Lieutenant over the Criminal Investigations Division, and I'm also the Public Information Officer for the Police Department. Here with me, I've got one of my investigators, Dorothy Buchanan. She's going to talk a little bit about a homicide case from 2020, one that she's worked very hard on.
Hey, I'm Detective Buchanan. I am currently working a murder that is unsolved of a 5-year-old girl. Her name is Italia Lamelli Graham. The homicide occurred in the Evergreen neighborhood on August 6th of 2020. And she was killed in her home while she was just playing with some toys. Italia was, like I said, only 5 years old. She was very excited to start school at the end of August, but she never made it to kindergarten.
Detective Buchanan, what was the cause of death?
Italia died of a gunshot wound to the head.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about the course of the investigation, what you and your fellow investigators did leading up until this point.
We've talked to a large amount of people in the community, people outside the community that know individuals that live in that particular area. We have talked with friends and family members, and leading up to the investigation, we have been able to talk with a lot of people that knew Italia, talk with a lot of people who were aware of the community and the members in the community of that particular area. Go ahead.
Tell me about the community support. What kind of support have you had from the community? I know that there were some things done, flyers and such, but can you elaborate further?
Our whole police department has been with that community since day one. We have not had the support we need in order to solve this homicide. We have had a lot of closed doors in our faces, not wanting to speak with us about what happened that night.
Okay. And as far as people coming forward, obviously someone or someone's people know what happened. What can they do to help you and help Italia's family get closure, solve this case? What are some of the things that they can do?
What we're asking is, if you know any detail or any information that you think you could help us, you can either contact us at 843-875-1650, or you can be anonymous and contact Crime Stoppers at 843-554-1111. Unfortunately, these types of cases, they're not going to be solved any other way. We need the community's help, the support, in order to bring Italia's to justice and help the family have some closure with the death of her.
And I know that there is a reward out there for anyone who would come forward. Can you explain a little bit about that?
We do have a reward from our partners at the ATF. We have raised $13,000, and it'll go to anyone who comes forward with information to the arrest and conviction of the individual responsible for her death.
So it's not as simple as a phone call, hey, this is what happened, and then you get 13 grand. It's got to be legitimate, it's got to be investigated, followed up.
Yeah, it really
and
has
all
to
the way
be
through to conviction.
It has to be good information, and it has to have enough to it to help get this person responsible behind bars. So we're looking at substantial amount of information to help solve this case.
And just to piggyback off of what Detective Buchanan said, obviously Atalia Graham, she's an innocent victim in this entire thing, which is even more tragic. Again, 5 years old, hasn't even started school yet. We know the Evergreen community. We're familiar with that area. We know that they're a very tight-knit community. And again, we're just reaching out, almost pleading and begging for people to come talk to us. Somebody knows something about this case. And there's somebody out on the streets who has murdered a 5-year-old girl. And we need the public's help to find this person.
All right, so continuing on with some open cases that we have, we're here with Detective Corporal Jonathan Davis. He's been working on a case. It's the Mcdonald case. Mr. Dale McDonald Jr. was murdered. I'm just going to go ahead and let Detective Davis talk about the case. And Detective Davis.
On February 18th, 2020, Somerville Police Department responded to 1300 Central Avenue, which is the Canebrake Apartments, located in between Orangeburg Road and Butternut, for shots fired. Upon officers' arrival, Mr. McDonald, known to his friends and family as DJ, was found deceased inside of his vehicle. Further investigation has led us to believe that Mr. McDonald was not the intended target of this homicide. He had just returned from work and was asleep in his vehicle at the time. We followed numerous leads, but we do need the community's help in solving this homicide.
And speaking of leads, what should people with knowledge of this crime, what should they do? How should they reach you?
They can contact me directly here at the police department. My number is 843-285-7042. They can remain anonymous and contact Crime Stoppers. That number is 843-554-1111.
All right, and this case, I know it's important. Give us a little detail about, tell us about Mr. McDonald. He's known as DJ, correct?
Correct. Mr. McDonald was a young man. He was 20 years old, just starting his life, trying to make it out on his own, out from underneath his parents' wing, and just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Diving into Mr. McDonald's background, as we do in these types of cases, I feel like I've gotten to know him pretty well, and a stand-up citizen from everything that we can tell. When we were doing a neighborhood canvas and we spoke with an elderly lady, and we showed her a picture, she's like, I remember that kid. He helped me carry in my groceries one day when it was raining. Just everything we hear is just an all-around good guy.
So what we need from you, Somerville, we need your help. We need your help on this case. We need some info to bring some closure to the victim, his family, the community. Canebrake apartment area, somebody in there, they've got to know something. Somebody's seen something. And I know there's a reward in this case as well. Detective Davis, you want to talk about that?
There is a reward through Crime Stoppers. The family has also put money forward. I believe that reward is currently at $3,000.
So $3,000 for doing the right thing, something that I know we wish as a police department, we know the community wishes somebody would have already done at this point, because here we are, we're January 2021. In this case, we've got to bring it to a close. We need your help, and reach out to us. Tell us what we need to bring closure to this case and solve it. I want to thank Detective Davis. I know you're a busy man. one of the supervisors in CID, so I know you're busy. Thank you for your time coming and joining us. All right, thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this segment here, I've got a special guy, Pfc Dante. I think we're going to talk about some things that he's got a pretty good expertise in. Dante, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into law enforcement and got into this little broadcast booth right now. What brought you to where you are?
Man, that's a much longer story than I think anyone's prepared for. I started out with the Department of Corrections, worked there for a couple of years. A bunch of guys that I worked with said that they were going to go be the police, and I gave in to peer pressure. And I went to a sheriff's department in the area. Worked there for a while, moved to the Low Country, got a job with another agency, worked there for about a decade and a half, and now that I am in the twilight, decided to move along. That's how I ended up here. And how I ended up in this booth, I got ambushed this morning, and here I am.
So I personally know, and obviously people in the community, they've probably run into you from time to time, but I know that you have an expertise in law enforcement that happens to be gangs.
Yes, sir. I spent a little while doing gang work.
So tell us how you got into that specific career track or knowledge base, if you will. How did you get into gangs? And
so gangs, my interest started with the Department of Corrections. Back then, we only had what we called one security threat group, and that was the Nation of Gods and Earths. And the state really focused on them. Everyone else, Bloods, Crips, it didn't matter who you were, wasn't as big an interest to the state as those guys. And so I started getting into their ideology and looking at their signs, their symbols, what they believed. And then I was like, well, if they believe this, well, what are Bloods thinking? And what are Crips and Latin Kings and Norteños and Sureños? And it just started to blossom. And it's super interesting to read some of the stuff that people follow, people believe, their creed, their rules, and see how it relates to, and for lack of a better term, for legitimate society, because gangs are really just illegitimate businesses. They have some of the best leaders that had they just done legal things, I could very well be working for one of them. And it's just, it was just an interest. I didn't do much of it in the sheriff's office, but when I went to the other agency, shortly after I got there, they instituted their gang unit. I worked in that for a couple of years and then ended up being the supervisor of that unit. And it's just, I mean, as a police officer, if you want to work a particular type of crime, work gangs, because they're doing it. You know, if you like prostitution and that side of it, they're doing it. You like getting guns and drugs, they're doing it. Property crimes, they're there. So it was just, the smorgasbord of crimes.
So it started off as kind of a personal interest at the Department of Corrections, and you kind of were looking into things on your own. Once you got into a gang unit, what kind of training did you get?
So we got, when I got into the gang unit, we were part of the East Coast Gang Investigators Association, as well as the South Carolina Gang Investigators Association, and they have conferences that last 3.5, 4 days, and they bring in folks from all over. They had some of the coppers that were doing gang investigations back before gangs were really on the radar, even out in LA. They're bringing in some really good guys that were there when MS-13 formed. That didn't know these guys as gangsters, but knew them as their neighbors. And so they bring in these guys, and then here more recently, they've been bringing in gang members, guys that were bosses of an outlaw motorcycle gang or, whatever, and did their thing. That, of course, got caught, ended up in prison, and now have realized the truth behind some of that. And now they're trying to make it better for us, make us safer, so that maybe the things that happen to them or to their family members don't happen to someone else. And so I've gone to a bunch of conferences, a bunch of classes at the academy. And unfortunately, a lot of it has just been on my own. Getting books, reading things, Gang Leader for a Day, about gangs in Chicago, Monster, a Crip out of LA. They wrote some great books. I even have some of Tukey Williams' stuff, the children's books. It's not really gang training, but it's nice to look at the mindset.
So obviously there's a lot of history, and there's a lot of things that, I think parents may be naive about some of the things that their kids are doing.
Definitely.
What do parents need to be looking for? Do we need to delve back into kind of the history of American gangs?
I mean, I think the big thing parents need to realize is that the Gangster Disciples, big gang in Chicago, it is a huge business. It's stretching into politics. It's in every facet of life. They changed the way they present themselves depending on the facet that they're in. If they're gangsters, they present themselves as gangsters. If they're in business, they present themselves as businessmen. And if they're politicians, they present themselves as politicians. That was started by 13 and 14-year-olds from Mississippi. From Mississippi. They had moved to Chicago, and there's a very long history behind the Gangster Disciples. But these were 13, 14, 15-year-old kids that now, when you talk about the Gangster Disciples, growth and development, the Genuine Determination Network, that was started by a teenager, a young teenager.
So what do parents need to look for? What do they need to be watching out for as far as things their kids are doing? What are some of the signs that they might be getting involved in some of this?
Unexplainable violence is one of the things that they can look for. Kids are going to be kids, and they're going to fight. God knows I did enough of it when I was a kid. But you kind of know when, my kid is having a problem with this other kid. He got into a fight with that kid because they're fighting over a girl. That's one thing. But when there's significant damage to the child and they're like, well, how'd that happen? I just some guys at school. And it's very, what's going on here? They need to delve into that, because it could be something as simple as two guys, one girl, and they're fighting over her. But it could be that some of them are still doing beat-ins, and they got to show their heart by taking the physical abuse to be part of that group. Other things, unexplained cash. My parents, I didn't have an allowance for a long time. So if I had money, they were like, well, where did that come from? And when I started working, they knew who I worked for, how much I was making about, so they could explain, oh, he has this much money. We know where that came from. If your kid is showing up with stacks of hundreds, you have to start asking questions as to where that came from. And then clothing. Everybody wants to be fashionable nowadays. But if your kid goes to a school whose school colors are green and gold, and the only thing they'll wear is blue, you have to question that. Everyone has a favorite color, but when it becomes an exclusive color,
Could be a problem.
Could be what we call a clue.
So that's something that parents can watch out for. What kind of resources are there in our area? Obviously, we're here in Somerville, but Low Country as a whole, are there resources out there that parents can use to reach out other than police?
Not to the extent that they need to be, and that's just, everybody has their issues, and there's just not enough resources for everyone. But there are some good nonprofits that teach young men, because it is not that girls don't get into it, but it is still predominantly a male society. There are some organizations that teach conflict resolution as far as how to deal with things. and they teach young men how to become appropriately acting adult men.
Mentorship programs.
Exactly.
Well, I want to kind of move on. Before we started, you kind of touched on something. Obviously, our department is big on community-oriented policing, and a lot of people don't know exactly what that means. When you say COP or community-oriented policing, what does that mean?
Man, that's a whole nother episode. Community-oriented policing is the term that a lot of agencies use to describe what used to be known as policing. Back in the beginning of law enforcement in the United States, and even if you go back to the 1800s of England, which is where the father of community-oriented policing came from, Sir Robert Peel, all those guys walked around. They were on foot. They were making contact with their community, and they talked to them. So it was very easy. If you saw a bobby walking along, you could approach them. You saw, an officer walking the beat in New York, you could approach them. They knew their area. Well, as criminals became more sophisticated and used vehicles, we started using vehicles. And then they had this great idea, the Radio Mobile Patrol, the RMP. Yeah. We're going to put a radio in a car, and now we can take, from an administrative standpoint, now you can take one officer. Instead of covering 2 blocks, you can cover 20. It's cost effective.
Sure.
I've got one guy doing roughly the same amount of work, but over a bigger area, so I don't have to spend as much. The problem with that is you can't talk to a police officer doing 55 in a car.
No, you cannot.
And so that was the beginning of the wedge between the citizenry and the police, as we are trying to move from call to call to call. I don't have time to talk to you. And it's not that these guys were being offensive or anything. It's just they had stuff to do, and that stuff wasn't talking to a person at a bodega.
Right, the radio's not stopping.
Exactly. It doesn't stop for that. And so as that culture developed within policing, there was a divide between the people and the police. And some folks recognized it, and they started teaching about community-oriented policing, because one of the things that Robert Peel is credited with is that the public is the police and the police are the public. The only difference is that the police are paid to give full-time attention to crime and its effects. And so they started teaching that these are things that we need to be doing. We need to be getting back into the community and talking to folks, because 90% of your population never has a contact with the police, ever. They're not doing anything illegal. They're not doing anything wrong. And so they don't see us until it's a bad day.
Maybe their worst day, likely.
Exactly. And so when you never see a person, they cease to be a person. I want folks to think about the last time they ordered pizza. The pizza delivery person wasn't Kevin. It was the pizza guy or the pizza girl.
Yeah.
And nobody cares about that person. They are non-persons. The mailman, UPS, all those folks are non-persons. They're just, my package arrived.
A deliverer.
Exactly. It's like waitresses and waiters. They're just, my stuff got here somehow, and nobody thinks about how. Well, the same thing happens to the police. These things occur. Nobody thinks that, I have, personal feelings. I have personal ideas. Even though you and I have been in the police for a while, we may have differences of opinion. People don't think about that. And so COP gets us back into the community, so that instead of going, oh, well, the police did this, people start going, well, the police did that, but I know Dante. I know Johnny. I mean, before I form an opinion on this, I need to talk to them and see what they think. And that changes the perception of the public towards the police, because we stop being these non-entities and we become people. And sometimes we can explain to them. And it's easier for them to accept a mistake, because we are human, if they know a human, rather than just being this thing.
We need to get out of the cars more, buddy.
Unask that car. Yes, sir. Oh, hey, can I say that? Yeah. Well, it's too late. I said it. We need to get out of the car. We need to go talk to people, and we need to do those things. But it can't just be that softer side. We have
Sure.
to have that problem-oriented element, and we have to have officers that do that, because it's all important. It's just that softer side, that chat has fallen by the wayside, because it's also not that exciting, you know? Do you want to go talk to a 75-year-old lady about how her day's going? No, people want to get guns and drugs and car chases, because that's what we've been taught is exciting. But now we got to look at what's important.
Right. And I think that's a lot of people's perception about police work. It's kind of skewed.
Oh, very much so.
TV,
Oh, yes, sir.
TV, the CSI effect. You face it out there when you're answering calls. People have an expectation based off of a very false,
Very false.
false narrative of what police can do, what they're supposed to do, and what they have the ability to do.
That is true. It's you watch these shows, and it's not just with like forensics. It's every aspect of policing. You know, they show us being able to zoom into a photo and figure out who this person is and everything that they've done. And I mean, folks probably haven't seen this, but 99% of our video footage looks like a smudge. You know, just take some ink on your thumb, squish it onto a piece of paper, and that's what we're getting. You know, NASA has...
Solve this.
Yeah, exactly. NASA has cameras that can see a dime from space, but I can't get good footage from 12 feet away. But on TV, they have that, and then on TV, all the police officers communicate. Different agencies communicate. The federal government communicates with the
They're
local
all
government.
in the same room.
Yeah, none of that occurs, at least in my experience. You know, there's some people communicate with friends. Agencies don't communicate with agencies.
And that's a shame. It's the onus is on all of us at our agencies to obviously communicate more frequently with our partners, because we're going to solve crime more. But what else is there about the perception, the TV perception in policing?
So when I started policing, the guys that were teaching me how to police had grown up watching TV, if they had a TV. And some of the police shows were things like Andy Griffith. You know,
Of course.
30 minutes, he's a sheriff, very little violence. But what that really was the Sarah model from community-oriented policing. You know, they were presented with a problem, they figured out a solution, they enacted that solution, and then they analyzed to see if it worked. So that's what they were growing up on. Even before our current pandemic, police academies and other agencies, other organizations rather, are using television to train us. So if I can be trained to be a police officer in a subject like human trafficking via video, what does a season of television do? Because that's, 9-15 hours of training.
Or what about binging an entire
5 seasons
Yeah.
of a show? Exactly. So that's training the person how to interact with the police and also how the police should interact. Now, when I was growing up, I was a TJ Hooker fan because, it was TJ Hooker. Who's not a fan?
Of course.
But if you look at Andy Griffith to TJ Hooker was still solving problems, but there was a lot more action. There were car chases. He was riding on hoods all the time. The PR-24 action was amazing. Completely false, but it was amazing to watch. So that kind of colored the way I thought police officers should act. Well, now what are people watching? They're watching, and this is no offense to the producers of these shows, but they're watching Cops and Live PD. And Cops was, fights and guns and drugs and all the very minute excitement.
Cherry-picked incidents.
Exactly. But the kids that were watching that as kids, that's what they think policing should be. I should be out here every day chasing a car, chasing someone over fences.
Kicking doors in.
And I don't recall my last vehicle pursuit between my last 2 agencies. That's how infrequent it is, but it was every episode of Cops.
Everyone.
So all of that perception, not only does it color our way of how to interact with the public It's telling me that when I get out with my next call for service, I'm probably going to fight them, or I'm going to have to do something because they're on drugs, or they're this or they're that. It also teaches the public how to interact with us, because now they're expecting foot pursuits and car chases and us to arrest them.
And getting searched.
And they expect it, and that's not how it is. That's not actually how police work is. But when you have 25 hours of training that say that is how it is, that it's a difficult thing to overcome.
Perceptions are realities.
All the time.
So I interviewed the chief earlier, and we spoke about COVID-19 and how it affected, the police department as a whole. What's your take as an individual police officer? 2020, I think the chief called it a dumpster fire when I interviewed him, but how did it affect you, Officer Gee, personally, COVID-19?
So this is probably not the answer you want. For me, I've been in the business for a while. I've fought bloody people with AIDS. I've transported people with tuberculosis. Any number of other illnesses have been in my car or spat in my face, and I've survived those. I'm not taking anything away from the severity of COVID-19, because the thing is it's a virus. It affects all of us differently. I've not been over worried about it, because I've had all these other really deadly things already thrown in my face. This is just another one to add to the pile. It has affected my ability to get out and talk to people, though, because masks and social distancing, and now people are always nervous and they're confused. Like before, you could shake hands or say hi or do whatever.
Now it's always people. Are we allowed to shake hands?
Exactly.
Elbow?
Everyone has forgotten how to do things that we did in 2019. Like, how do I shop? If I go to a department store, how do I get in line? And so all these things have slowed everything down and kind of put up some minor things. But me personally, in my personal life, it's just another thing.
It has not affected your MO, your modus operandi of how you operate on the streets.
Not at all.
As a police officer.
Not at all.
All right, folks. Good interview with Officer Dante Gee. I'm sure we're going to have him back. I like this guy. He's a good interview.
Thank you.
And we thank you for listening. And Dante, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.